Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about issue number 3 through 5 of Dark X-Men, written by Steve Fox, but before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. So with that said, this issue opens up with the evil angel going toe-to-toe with Implate as Maggot helps the Morlocks make their escape. So with the battle waging on, the team quickly realized that whatever this creature is, their friend, Warren, is no longer in there. So with the decision made for them, Calypso dived right into the action ready to defend her people. So with the team trapped between a rock and a hard place, Gambit was forced to come to terms with the fact that taking out his once friend was the only play they had. So with the fight heating up, we jump over to Mexico, with Madelyne, Alex, Albert, and Feint looking for Marissa Alguera. But when they get there, they quickly notice that Guerra wasn't about to welcome them with open arms. But despite her non-willingness to welcome them, Alex didn't want their first impression to be guns blazing either, especially because he didn't want to leave Guerra and her people unprotected. So right when they were trying to formalize a plan, Zero just so happened to mention that some years ago he overran her whole town with cyborg zombies. And right on cue, one of the defenses that Guerra had in place ruptured and spilled out dangerous spores. So in a race against the clock, each member of the team was incapacitated with the exception of Feint, because with the help of her mutant ability she was able to manifest a mask to protect her from the gas. Now the slumber brought on by the spores is fast and absolute. Now Alex's summer dreams reflect a mind burdened with unaddressed issues, while Kenji's dream was free of worry. And as for Madelyne Pryor's nightmares, they hardly faze her at all, because in her normal life, she had already lived through it. So as she made her way through her mental hallucinations, she stated that it may take her a few minutes to use her telekinesis to pluck the spores from her own sleeping body, so in the meantime, she wanted to see what horrors her subconscious concocted for her. So the next page we see each member foaming from the mouth as Feint stood alone. So with little options left available to her, she found it best to leave them all behind for the time being, despite feeling wrong about it. Because her goal was to reach Guerra in hopes of talking her into undoing her biological attack. So as Feint journeys deeper into the mushroom, we transition back to the death boat, with Gambit having a word with Azazel. Because at this moment in time, Azazel wanted nothing to do with this fight, but see, that is of little concern to our Cajun friend. Because Gambit let Azazel know that today he will be an X-Man, whether he wanted to or not. So with the choice made for Azazel, he decided to bamf Gambit right above the evil Warren. And right when Gambit made contact with his once friend, he briefly told him that he was sorry for what he was about to do, and proceeded to use his ability to disintegrate him. So with the battle over, we fast forward just a little bit ahead to Gambit letting Calypso know that Madelyne's Limbo Embassy might be the best place to go if they need a place to lay low at. Because, as of right now, the government still recognizes its borders. So with the offer extended, unfortunately, Calypso decided to turn it down, despite being extremely thankful for their help. Now, the reason why she turned it down was because the Morlocks are used to fending for themselves and avoiding trouble, so with them being tied to the embassy, a bigger target may be placed on their backs. So right as the team prepared to set off, Maggot decided to speak up and reveal how he was planning on staying with the Morlocks. So with that going down, we transitioned back to our problem in Mexico. Because when we get there, we see how Feint is making her way through the mushroom-infested town while having a small conversation with Guerra. And while they're talking, she is trying her best to convince her that their team isn't as bad as they may look. And they actually have a safe place available for her if she needs it. But that is when she lets our hero know that she doesn't need their safe space, because she was able to convert this city into a real safe place for her and the mutants she protects. Because long ago, she visited Krakoa and she liked it, but the only problem was that there were very few gates located in her home country of Mexico. So with a lack of accessibility for her people to get to Krakoa, she put it upon herself to ensure their safety. So as the two young mutants continue their conversation, we jump back over to Madelyne on the ground waking up to see a creature created in last issue making its move. But with Madelyne being as powerful as she was barely able to avoid the first assault from the creature. So the battle on and danger lurking around, Madelyne's next move was to immediately wake up the rest of her team. So with their defenses up, Madelyne went on to do some deep diving in the creature's mind, just to find out that this creature is indeed a Kurt Wagner, but not the one they know. And as for its humanity, that had been consumed and the only thing left is its pure animal instincts. So with Zero and Albert trying their best to hold it back, the creature just seemed a little too fast for them. So that was when Havok told them to get out of his way so he could open fire. But before he could do it, his arms started to bubble up. Now this right here was completely freaking him out, and if I had to guess, this was a side effect of Madelyne bringing him back to life. But anyway, getting back to the story, we pick back up with Feint talking with some of the mutants that were protected by Gara. And right in the middle of their conversation, the evil Kurt bamfed right above them and proceeded to go directly for the innocent, but before it was able to get its teeth around them, Feint was able to transform into a monstrous form of herself and repel its attack. So with the creature hurt, it quickly made its escape as Madelyne and the rest of the team arrived on the scene. But see, even though the day was saved, the citizens that were there weren't happy about what just transpired, because Gara states that she made a mistake by letting them in, because they had brought the devils with them. Because from her perspective, they weren't a target before Feint and her team got there. So because of that, it was time for them to leave their home before more arrived. But see, that was where she was wrong. Because Madelyne states that Gara's group may not have been top priority for the humans seeking to exterminate their kind, but she assured her that they would have eventually worked the way down to her level. But at the end of the day, she has few unshakable principles, and chief among them is that she would never force anyone to follow her will. And because of that, she isn't hoping to waste her time trying to help them. So with the rejection made clear, Madelyne and her team exit the city in hopes of finding more mutants deserving of their aid. So with the team gone, we jump over miles away to an Orchis black site. And once we get there, we see one of the Orchis higher-ups tell the Goblin Queen that one asset was destroyed and another was wounded. All while Madelyne's team suffers not a single casualty. And considering the Goblin Queen's effective efforts isn't producing tangible anti-mutant results, the Goblin Queen decided to turn her attention and switch her approach to something closer to Madelyne's home, someone like Ben Reilly. So with that issue coming to an end, we transition over to issue number 4, and when we get there, we see both Gambit and Rogue on top of a rooftop in a deep embrace under the night sky. For both of their current allegiance falls on two different teams, but yet both purposes are the same, and that is to help mutants wherever they can. So with the two reunited, Rogue tells her love, Gambit, she doesn't trust Madelyne, and doesn't like the idea of leaving Gambit alone in the Limbo Embassy much longer. Which is something Gambit could completely agree with. But in his own words, he had to admit that she and her team are doing a lot of good for a lot of mutants. Gambit then goes on to say that Maddie has her own witchy ways of finding mutants. Now, not everyone accepts the embassy invitation, but enough do. And to our Cajun friend, that is enough to keep him around and doing what needs to be done. Now on a side note, Gambit goes on to explain the current state of the entire team, starting with Implate and Azazel, and how Azazel's contract with Implate is starting to wear thin. And as for Zero, it is still a little weird seeing Zero attached to a robotic version of Wolverine. And as for Feint, he describes her as having a lot of attitude in a petite frame, and how Madelyne is currently playing teacher to her. And finally, Gambit brings up how Havok is falling apart due to Madelyne's resurrection. So with that update provided, Rogue puts her trust in her love and proceeds to take off, but not before sharing a goodbye kiss for the road with him. So following their interactions, we skip over to the Goblin Queen being escorted by Agent Valen and Agent Kroll through an Orchis prison in New York. And while they're there, she is looking for a very certain mutant. A very certain mutant that she can use as a skeleton key to enter right through the front door of Madelyne's castle. And once inside, CHASM would be theirs for the taking. Now at this point, we have no idea what CHASM has to do with the Goblin Queen's plan, with the exception that he is a very important part of it. So following that, on the very next page, we see how Gambit is entering into the Limbo Embassy after his meeting with Rogue. And when he gets in, he runs right into Madelyne and Havok as they were making their way to the entrance of said embassy. Because, according to them, there is currently a mutant running full speed towards the front gate, screaming out both psychically and out loud how he needs help, because directly behind him was a couple of Orchis' soldiers ready to put him down. But lucky for him, the mutant by the name Nil Steiger, also known as Abyss, made his way into the embassy just in time. Now, just to give some context to his power, Abyss has the ability to use his body as a gateway to a cold, lifeless dimension over which he has only limited control over. So with Havok forcing the soldiers back, Madelyne reaches down for the frantic mutant to help him to his feet. But when she goes to read his mind, she couldn't help but notice how much of a frenzy it was in. So when Madelyne asked what they did to him, he could only respond by saying she made him a weapon. And at that moment his mutant ability activated and proceeded to suck in Madelyne, Gambit, Havok, and Zero. So with most of the Dark X-Men team trapped within Abyss, an Orchis strike team consisting of Agent Valen, Crow, a platoon of hitters, and the Goblin Queen emerged from armor vehicles ready to do their worst. So with them entering the front door, Azazel watches from above, calculating his next moves, because according to him, he is currently at a crossroads. So with the door open and the fight on, the mutants within the embassy attempted to put up a fight, but unfortunately, the Goblin Queen was on a whole other level. So with the mutants outmatched, some attempted to flee, but before they could get away, the Bamf Beast was there to cut off their escape. So one by one each mutant started to get cut down in a horrific fashion with no end in sight. So with the kill team making their way up the stairs, the hellstorm of bullets shredded every mutant in their path. So with Limbo's prison unprotected, Agent Valen started an incantation to open the portal to CHASM's cell. But before she could get it fully open, Webb shot out and took down 2 soldiers. So with the door open, CHASM made his move and spun into action, and while he was doing his thing, he made sure to point out that he wasn't locked away long enough to forget what the flower on their shoulder actually meant. Because he states that just because he isn't a hero, doesn't mean he is a monster. He then goes on to say, if you're here to try to recruit me to get back against mutants because one locked me up, then they can turn back around and return from where they came. Because just because he has a problem with a few mutants doesn't mean he hates them all. So with that said, Crow points out how they would like to offer him a chance to strike back at his jailer, and if they team up together they will be able to kill Madelyne Pryor today. But that was when CHASM tells him to stop it right there, because he is not interested in what they are trying to sell him. Because he has had enough goblins to last a lifetime. Now with his position made clear, Ben turns right back around and proceeds to re-enter his prison. Following that, we transitioned outside with the 2 Orchis' soldiers hovering over Abyss, and before they knew what hit them, out of nowhere, Azazel and Implate bamps right over them and proceeded to take out both soldiers. So with both soldiers down, we find out that Abyss is one of Azazel's sons. And Azazel then goes on to say, please forgive him if his prodigies have begun to blur over the centuries. Azazel is fully aware he had been a poor parent because fatherhood had never been his forte, and if he was honest, he just used it as a means to an end. So with his son in his arms, he then goes on to say how it is a privilege to be with his child when it truly counts. Because the very next thing he does is snap his neck. So with Azazel killing his child in cold blood, the rest of the team was quickly released. Now on a side note, Madelyne points out how she hoped Azazel knew that doing that would free them, in which Azazel pretends to have known the outcome the whole time. But anyway, he then goes on to tell her that there is a much more worthy recipient of her anger inside the embassy that looks a lot like her. Now with everything hitting the fan, the Goblin Queen grabs hold of Feint in hopes of finding the location of Madelyne's cerebro, in which of course our hero refuses to tell her anything. So with that out the way, Madelyne and her team made their way into the embassy only to see all their hard work piled up as a throne of blood for the Goblin Queen to sit. Because according to the Queen, this is Madelyne's opportunity to submit or die, because this is her eviction notice. So with that out there, issue number 4 goes to an end, as we move on to issue number 5. Now following that, we open up with both sides in an all-out battle. Madelyne and her team are holding nothing back as they collide headfirst with the Goblin forces. With Havok laying down cover fire, Azazel bamps around the battlefield picking off targets one at a time. So with all that going on, Madelyne goes straight for the Goblin Queen, and upon reading her mind she discovers that the Goblin Queen allowed Orchis to neuter her mutant ability. But see, this is something that does not really faze the Goblin Queen, because she states that she had long outgrown her mutant powers. And in return of giving up her ability, these Orchis fools let their guard down around her. Which is a huge mistake, because throughout her life, she lived in many different limbos, and through her travels, she had mastered the arcane arts to a level that Madelyne could only dream of. So the information out there, Madelyne goes on to say the Mercy Crown is not a weapon, but instead a tool used to rescue mutants. But see, the Goblin Queen sees things a little different. Because the Goblin Queen says that this device can touch all mutant souls on Earth and perhaps beyond. And she doesn't need to look into Madelyne's mind to know why she made something like this. Because from her perspective, if Orchis was to fall, Scott Summers and all his other good little mutants will need new threats to keep them busy. And because of that, she believes that she made the Mercy Crown so that when the X-Men inevitably turns on her, she can use this weapon to sniff them all out if need be. So with the horns removed, she proceeds to put the crown upon her head and states that she has been across many universes, and in all of them, Madelyne Pryors are born to suffer. And to the Goblin Queen, this concept is a sole constant. And the only way they ever overcome the suffering is by seizing the power themselves. Which is why she is currently there, because despite what everyone believes, Orchis hasn't broken her, because she is doing as she wishes. And she hasn't come there to unseat Madelyne on Orchis' behalf, but rather she came there to recruit her, to help her wage war against the world. So following that, we skip over to Agent Crow preparing to go into battle with Zero and Albert, but the crazy part about it is Agent Crow was using a weapon made of LED's head. So with things about to kick off, Albert remembered his old friend and lunged towards the Orchis agent with claws out straightened. And in a blink of an eye, the weapon was used and an explosion went off, and when the smoke was cleared, Albert, Zero, and LED stood victorious as the agent was reduced to a pile of bones and blood. So with one agent down, we transition over to Agent Valen running for her life while calling out to her demon who promised to protect her. But unfortunately, his cries fell upon deaf ears, for Azazel was stalking her from the shadows ready to strike. So as he grabbed her, he stated that Valen probably sold her soul to the first devil who crossed her path, which was a bad idea, because there's always a bigger, badder wolf. And before she knew it, he bamfed her into a wall, killing her on the spot. And as for his servant, Implate, he was hard at work fighting off the bamf beast from earlier. And when he was backed against the wall, he asked for Azazel to step in and help, but to his dismay, Azazel didn't lift a finger and left him to his own fate. But in a twist of fate, Template tossed the creature towards Azazel, and before he could react, the creature proceeded to rip his body clean in half, which effectively ended Implate's family debt with Azazel. So with his Luger clean, Implate proceeded to walk out of the battle, for he didn't care about anyone there to begin with. So with that coming to conclusion, we skip back over to Madelyne Pryor talking to the Goblin Queen about how she nearly conquered the world twice. And each time she was about to accomplish her goal, the X-Men defeated her, and Scott, Jean, and Alex always welcomed her back. But see, this was nothing new to the Goblin Queen, for in her long life she has done the same. And at the end of her journey, she still felt that she could only rely on herself. And just like that, she sent a wave of energy towards Havok, which knocked him off his feet. So with Madelyne Pryor's love knocked out, she had decided she had enough and released a wave of energy of her own, which paralyzed everybody in their tracks. Well, when I say everyone, I'm referring to everyone with the exception of Albert, because with this temporary pause, Albert took this opportunity to cut Zero off of his body. So getting back to the main story, the now frozen Goblin Queen then goes on to further entice Madelyne to take her crown and to obliterate her false attachments. And together, they can use Limbo as a gateway to gather more Madelynes like themselves and rule everything. So with the offer given, Madelyne Pryor takes a moment to think. Madelyne states that every time she wears the Mercy Crown, she could feel the power just beyond her fingertips. And if she really wanted to, she could reach out and grab every last soul like a fragile little bird and squeezed. So just as her hand interlocks with the Goblin Queen, Feint calls out for her teacher to wait. And in that brief moment, Feint used her power to take the appearance of Madelyne and tell her to remember who she is, who she used to be, and finally who she can still become. So with the reminder standing front and center, Madelyne took hold of her staff and turned and sliced the Goblin Queen's head clear off her body and putting an end to her devilish games. So with the threat defeated and the Goblin Queen gone, we pick up a week after the battle in the Limbo Embassy. And when we get there, we get a dialogue to close out the story. Because Madelyne Pryor used to dream of a life stolen from her until she remembered that none of us live just one life. Now because the Limbo Embassy reflected its ruler, it is of no surprise to Madelyne that this in-between dimension is in a constant state of change. So much so, that Madelyne allowed Feint, Madelyne Star Student, and Gambit to leave the team and rejoin the ranks of the X-Men. But see, that wasn't it, because Madelyne also allowed the embassy doors to remain open for any mutant in need. And as for those who didn't want Madelyne's help, they were left to do their own thing. For Madelyne has come to accept that the sanctuary she offers is not for everyone. Because certain souls are beyond salvation and not all monsters can be tamed. And others just need to find their own way through life. So with that established, on the final page, we get Madelyne talking to Alex. And as we could see, Alex didn't really know what to do moving forward since most of the X-Men team had left. But that is when Madelyne tells him that she has made a rare misstep in declaring herself a leader because Jean was born to lead, whereas all Madelynes was born to suffer. But in the end, none of this mattered anyway, because our Madelyne had made herself more. She has made herself Madelyne Pryor, the ruler of Limbo and once and forever the Goblin Queen. So with that said, the final issue of X-Men Dark comes to an end. Now, this story wasn't one of the best runs in the Fall of X storylines, but it was decent for what it was. To me, Madelyne as a character didn't go through any character development in this arc because the same Madelyne we get in the end was the same one we started with in the beginning, which to me was a big missed opportunity. So with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.